think it's the biggest fiscal issue facing the state of California and local governments throughout the state.
What is this biggest fiscal issue? It's the pension benefits and health care commitments to public employee retirees. How big is this problem? Keith Richmond, a former member of the California State Assembly, explains.
The state government in the year 2000-2001 paid about $160 million per year. And this year the state government is going to pay about $2.7 billion for pension benefits. And that does not include the retiree health care costs.
Carl DeMaio, the president and founder of the Performance Institute, researched the estimated commitments required for not only state employees, but added to that figure the liabilities to employees by local governments.
From a financial standpoint, just what we know right now, and I want to caveat my comments by saying we don't know the true extent of the liability. It's going to get a lot worse. $130 billion is the latest estimate of hard numbers, even before you factor in health benefits. That's for state and local in the state of California. Underfunded, unfunded liabilities. That is 3 times the total amount of outstanding debt, total debt issued by the state of California. Triple. All the bonds outstanding.
And so here we have underfunded pension plans in CalPERS. The CalSTRS retirement plan, which is the retirement plan for teachers, is underfunded. In fact, the Teachers Retirement Fund and their board has acknowledged that their fund is actuarially unsound.
Jack Ames is the chief executive officer of CalSTRS, California State Teachers Retirement System, which is the largest teachers retirement system in the United States. He deflected the criticism of CalSTRS by claiming the issue is a problem in the private sector as well.
I'm going to talk real frankly here. This often turns into public sector bashing. But the reality is there are absolutely economic issues that need to be addressed on the table in the public sector, and they also need to be addressed on the private sector side as well. Absolutely.
So when you look at the total situation in the state of California and local governments throughout the state, the estimates are that between the state and local governments that we have unfunded liabilities for pensions and retiree health benefits of somewhere between $200 and $300 billion.
So how are we going to pay for this unfunded debt? According to Mr. Richmond, there's been an attempt to move this debt into bonds.
Between 1992 or 1993 and 2002 or 2003, there was about $12 billion of pension obligation bonds that were issued in the state of California. As an example, Riverside County, they had a large unfunded liability in their pension plan, about $600 million, and so they went out and issued a pension obligation bond that the people of Riverside County are going to be paying for the next 30 years.
Scott Meinert is the CEO of Guggenheim Partners Asset Management and is considered an expert on the subject of public finance. He's very familiar with bonded indebtedness, how it works, and how much they cost.
If we were to attempt to bond today the full obligation, it would amount to issuing, let's say, $300 billion worth of debt. You could expect a number somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 billion, maybe $20 billion a year for the next 30 years, just in interest alone.
$15 to $20 billion a year, just for interest alone. Keith Richmond explains that the interest always doubles the cost of the bonds.
Essentially, for any bond, it's going to cost double what the bond is. So for $40 billion, the total cost is going to end up being about $80 billion between the principal and interest.
What that translates into is that for every citizen in the state, you would be looking at an incremental tax burden of somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 or $400, which means it would translate in a typical household of 4 to something like $1,200 to $1,600 a year of burden in terms of taxation.
$1,200 to $1,600 every year for every California household, just to pay for retirement benefits of government employees. We wondered if California residents were going to tolerate such a massive increase in their state taxes.
Certainly the taxpayers are going to revolt in terms of wanting to pay these higher taxes. And if they don't revolt, that may even be worse. because the tax burden in the state could become so high relative to other states that you really discourage economic development in the state of California. We're already experiencing some of that now because of the high tax rates. Corporations moving out of state. I personally know people of means and who had businesses here who have moved out of the state to Tennessee to escape the tax burden of the state of California. So ultimately, if there is no correction to this, it really dims the prospects for California's economic growth, which is now a vicious cycle. Because once we have slowed down economic development and growth in the state of California, and there are fewer high-paying jobs and wages, there's a smaller tax base to work with, and the liability is fixed. So we may actually have a diminution of the tax base, which would lead to lower tax revenues, which any attempt to increase the taxes would only exacerbate the problem.
Mr. Minard is very concerned about using bonds to solve the impending retiree benefit crisis. He suggests that the allure of bonds is very dangerous.
The willingness of the electorate to indebt itself or its future for all of these things today is really problematic in that it isn't forcing the legislature to deal with the financial crisis we currently face. We're able to defer this into the future. The money that's coming from these infrastructure bonds, for instance, would have been money that came out of the general fund if we really felt these things had to be built. So therefore, all that has happened is that we've authorized Sacramento to borrow money on our behalf so that they can continue to spend the money in the general fund for what other purposes they want to.
Adrian Moore is the Vice President of Research from the Reason Foundation. He suggests that our taxes should be paying for infrastructure, which includes dams, waterworks, roads, bridges, and electrical transmission systems, and not bonds.
We believed that infrastructure was one of the core functions of our state government, that it was what drove so much of our economic growth. And so each year in our budget, we made appropriate investments in infrastructure. We don't do that anymore. We make very little investment in our infrastructure each year out of our budget, and instead we spend on the many other things that we've decided to spend on in the last few decades, and we borrow predominantly, rather than using borrowing to leverage our ongoing spending to deliver projects in a timely and cost-effective way. Now we just borrow. That's just how we do business. We don't really allocate money for infrastructure out of our budget.
But the proponents of bonds claim that using bonds for infrastructure is an investment in our state. Mr. Minard agrees, but that it's an investment we are already making.
Because I agree, it is an investment in the future of the state. But I think it's an investment that we're already paying for through our state taxes. It wasn't necessary to borrow more money. All this did is allow the state not to address the true fiscal issues that it faces by essentially borrowing money to cover things that it should be able to pay for out of the taxes that we pay already.
The problem is that government proposes bonds just like we use credit cards.
Let me just say, I think voters oftentimes think that bond money is free money, that it's not going to cost them anything, and it does cost them.
I think a lot of the electorate is as guilty as the politicians, and that is that they have chosen to do the trade-off of what's good for me for today and let the consequences fall into the future when somebody else may have to pay for it. So it's easier to borrow money that our grandchildren will pay off so that we can have better highways today than to pay the bill ourselves.
Scott Minard quoted the warning from French historian Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote about his impression of America way back in 1835.
And he drew a conclusion in the book, which was that the American democracy will prosper until such a time that its populace realizes that it can vote prosperity from its own treasuries. And then it will slip into a soft despotism. It's the voters who are making these choices. They are choosing to be able to line their pockets today with commitments from our treasuries. so that they can have prosperity today at the expense of somebody else in the future. And ultimately, it will happen that we sell our rights away so that we can live at a certain standard today. So until the public realizes and wakes up and realizes that we are handing more and more authority over to our legislatures and to our executives that govern us, and that they are taking away our liberties and rights and our flexibility by raising our taxes and making bond commitments on our behalf, this process will continue. And hopefully that change, that great awakening for America, will come soon.
We want to know what you, the viewers, think. Please respond to our survey and leave your comments below. Number 1, were you aware that when you vote on a $50 million bond, that you are voting to approve an additional $50 million in interest? Yes or no? Number 2, do you think that ballot language should disclose the amount of interest on the bond? Yes or no? Number 3, do you think that our government should use our taxes for infrastructure projects as a priority over social programs? Yes or no? Please respond to our survey and be sure and leave your comments below. Thank you.